Hello, this is Lawrence Holgate, the host of the podcast Understanding Plato and the author of the textbook Understanding Plato. This is episode 12, a continuation of our discussion of Plato's Republic. We are in book 1. If you're looking at my book, if you're reading from it, we are in chapter 6 of that book and in section 6.1.4 titled "Do Rulers Rule for the Good of Their Subjects?" Socrates doesn't challenge the remark of Thrasymachus that we should use a precise definition of the word ruler. But by using this precise sense, Socrates gets Thrasymachus to admit that the ruler, quote, to the extent that he is a ruler, never considers or enjoins what is advantageous for himself, but what is advantageous for his subject, that on which he practices his craft. And in order to prove this, Socrates mentions several examples of crafts. He uses the example of medicine, of horse breeding, of sailing a ship, each of which is shown to be practiced not for the advantage of the doctor or the horse breeder or the ship's captain, but for the advantage of the patient, of the horse, or the ship's passengers. Each of these practitioners may make money at what they do, but in the precise sense of each of these words, money-making is incidental. It is not part of the definition of the craft itself. Now notice how Socrates reaches this conclusion. He uses 3 examples to support the generalization that all crafts consider what is advantageous for its subject. He then applies this generalization to the craft of ruling, and he gets the desired conclusion about rulers. But the conclusion is probable, not certain. For all we know, there are unexamined exceptions to the generalization, and these exceptions might include the craft of ruling. Now, when I say that the conclusion is probable, not certain, it's a type of inductive inference in which a conclusion is derived from samples. For example, we take 10 rotten apples out of a barrel, and we conclude that all the apples in the barrel are probably rotten, even though we have not yet removed all the apples. Our conclusion about the remaining apples is probable, not certain. Okay. Now, Thrasymachus believes that he's found an exception in the case of shepherds and cowherds. They are interested in fattening and taking care of their sheep and cattle, but this is not done for the benefit of the sheep and the cattle. They fatten them only because this is a means to the ultimate end of getting a greater profit for their master and for themselves. Thrasymachus observes that true rulers are more like shepherds than they are like doctors. They ultimately regard their subjects as a means to promoting their own advantage. But Socrates is not willing to give up on this point. After listening to a long speech by Thrasymachus on injustice, which we'll discuss later, Socrates calls wage earning a type of craft. I'll repeat that. Wage earning, he says, is itself a type of craft. And he warns Thrasymachus and the audience there on that day not to confuse wage earning with other crafts such as medicine. Wage earning is not part of the definition of medicine, and medicine is not part of the definition of wage earning, even though it might be true that some of those who earn wages do so while they practice medicine, and some of those who practice medicine do earn wages. And second, if a doctor gets any benefit from the practice of her craft, it is through earning a wage, not from medicine. Indeed, she may decide not to earn a wage at all while practicing medicine, but if she does decide to do this, it is still the case that the only benefit of the craft of medicine is the subject of the craft. That is, it's the patient. Third, Socrates applies this distinction to the craft of sheepherding by acknowledging that the shepherd fattens the sheep, quote, to eat well or to make a future sale, end quote. But this means only that he is practicing the craft of money-making rather than the craft of shepherding, it is still the case that the beneficiary of the craft of shepherding is the sheep. Quote, "The only concern of the craft of shepherding is to provide what is best for that with which it deals." That's in the Republic, paragraph 345D. And by extension, the only beneficiary of the craft of ruling are the subjects of the ruler, even if the ruler should happen to earn a wage. Now, let me just go off the script for a bit. Think about who is ruler in the United States federal system. If I said who are the rulers, I mean who are those who make the laws? And we're going to say members of Congress. They would make the rule. They would make the laws. The beneficiary of the craft of the laws then would be the subjects of our representatives, those who they represent, you and I. The rulers would earn a wage, but they're not ruling. That is, our lawmakers, our members of Congress, are not doing this just to earn a wage, or maybe not to earn a wage at all. What they see themselves as doing something for our benefit. We can argue that later. Is injustice more profitable than justice? Thrasymachus makes his longest speech about the superiority of what he calls complete injustice. He argues that, quote, "Injustice, if it is on a large enough scale, is stronger, freer, and more masterful than justice." And by a large scale, he means that the rule of a tyrant who, quote, "appropriates the possessions of the citizens and then kidnaps and enslaves the possessors as well." He says this is injustice of the more complete sort, the sort that makes those who do injustice happiest and those who suffer it, that is, those who are unwilling to do injustice, most wretched. Incomplete injustice, on the other hand, is characterized by the petty thief, the robber or the housebreaker, who inevitably gets caught and is punished. But the tyrant, Thrasymachus says, never gets caught and is applauded not only by the citizens and all who learn that he has committed the whole of injustice. Now that passage sets up much of the discussion in the remainder of the Republic, of the book. Although Socrates tries to convince Thrasymachus that an unjust individual is not wise and good, it is clear that he is much more interested in the claim of the Thrasymachus that, quote, "the best city is the one that is most completely unjust." So let's look at that. The unjust city and the unjust person, an analogy is being made. The first point made by Socrates in response is that any group of individuals, whether it is a city, an army, a band of robbers, or thieves, or any other group with a common unjust purpose, could not achieve that purpose if its members were unjust to one another. Try to imagine a group of thieves about to rob a bank who break promises and then lie to each other about the location of the bank vault and the getaway car. Obviously, they would not be able to achieve their purpose, but would cause faction, hatreds, and quarrels among them. Well, the same thing would happen even in a smaller group of only two people. If injustice takes root, they would soon be at odds. They would hate each other and be enemies to one another. But now, somewhat to our puzzlement, Socrates makes the same point about injustice arising within a single individual. We're not talking about a group now. We're talking about a single person. Socrates makes no attempt to explain what this means, or even to explain how injustice in a single individual is like injustice in a group of individuals. And Thrasymachus doesn't challenge him on this point. So Socrates continues to exploit the analogy by saying that injustice in an individual will have the same effect that it has in a group of persons. Quote, "It will make him incapable of acting because of inner faction, and not being of one mind with himself. And second, it will make him his own enemy, as well as the enemy of the people. Thrasymachus concludes this part of the dialogue with a sarcastic remark. He says, and this is famous, a famous quote, "Feast yourself confidently on the argument. Don't worry, I won't oppose you so as not to arouse the enmity of your friends here." The final set of questions that Socrates asks Thrasymachus is part of an attempt of Socrates to get him to admit that just people live better and are happier than unjust ones. He wants Thrasymachus just to turn the whole thing around. Don't you agree, Thrasymachus, that just people live better and they're happier than people who are unjust? And the first question he asks is whether it is true that the function of each thing is what it alone can do or what it does better than anything else. He's defining the concept of what it is to be a function of a thing. It is either what it alone can do or what it does better than anything else. He uses as his examples the human eye, the human ear, or a pruning knife. And in each case, the function of each is what it either does alone, for example, only the eyes can see and only the ears can hear, or it is what it does better than anything else. Any knife can cut a vine, but a pruning knife is designed for this purpose. So we'd say that the function of the pruning knife is having this particular design, which is to prune. Corresponding to the idea of function is the idea of a virtue of a thing. In this context, the word virtue is equivalent to the word excellence. To say that something has a virtue is to say that it has a particular excellence. For example, the virtue or excellence of the ears is to hear well, and the virtue or excellence of the eyes is to see well. Neither the eyes nor the ears could perform their function well if they lacked their proper virtue, but had the vice instead, vice being the opposite of virtue. If you have the vice of poor vision or deafness, then this means that these organs are performing their function. I know that we don't use the word vice in that sense. When I think of vice, I think of the vice squad. I don't think of poor vision. But if virtue means excellence, then vice, its opposite, would mean something that is poor or not excellent. Once again, Socrates generalizes by making an inductive inference. He says the same argument applies to everything else: chairs, tables, cell phones, wombats, and even the soul. The soul has a function, quote, that you could not perform with anything else. For example, taking care of things, ruling, deliberating, and all other such things. Living is also a function of the soul, and there is a virtue attached to this function that allows it to perform its function well. That virtue is called, and this is a surprise, justice. And the vice of the soul, preventing it from performing its function well, is injustice. Hence, it is only those with a just soul that live well, are blessed and happy, while those with an unjust soul live badly and are wretched. It follows that injustice is never more profitable than justice. But Socrates is unhappy with this outcome. In the concluding paragraph of Book 1 of the Republic, he confesses that he cannot say with any certainty that justice is more profitable than injustice until he discovers what justice is. And he blames himself for this. He let himself get sidetracked by other questions. He admits that he is no closer to a definition of justice than he was at the start of the dialogue. Hence, Socrates says, the result of the discussion, so far as I am concerned, is that I know nothing. Well, that's the end of Republic, Book 1. We'll continue next week with Book 2 for Episode 13. In the meantime, if you want to get a copy of my book so you can follow along, I've said in each of the other podcasts, it's easy to find. Understanding Plato, the Smart Student's Guide to the Socratic Dialogues in the Republic. Just go to either my website, www.houlgatebooks.com, HOULGATE books.com. And you can get a free book, by the way, by going there. I'm giving away my book just called Understanding Philosophy, which is kind of an introduction to philosophy and its method. And then scroll down that opening page to the book cover for Understanding Plato, and it will take you right into the detail page for the book on Amazon.com. And then you can make a decision about whether you want to buy the copy that is digital, or whether you want to buy a print copy, which will take longer to get to you, of course. That's it for today, and we'll see you at episode 13, book in which we're discussing, or will be discussing, chapter 7, book, A New Argument for Injustice in Republic, Book 2. Thank you.